Hey everyone, thanks for stopping by to Joe Naab Wright's YouTube channel, talking sports. Going to break down the 2017-2018 NFL season, predicting wins and losses for each team as well as the playoff outlook. Starting with the Arizona Cardinals, this could be an interesting year as Carson Palmer and Fitzgerald head towards the latter half of their careers. Definitely future Hall of Famers, potentially, for sure, for Fitzgerald. Will their team rally around them? You have some top talent, J.J. Nelson, John Brown, able to take the top off the defense, get guys like Fitzgerald, Gresham, and David Johnson underneath to move the chains. Stout defense led by Carlos Dansby and Patrick Peterson, great elite shutdown corner. Could be an interesting team to watch in a fairly tough division with Seattle. Had them finishing 9-7, flirting with playoff potential again. Will this team rally around maybe a potential Fitzgerald announcement of his retirement, just like Baltimore did with Ray Lewis a couple years ago? Could see a playoff run and possibly a Super Bowl win in Arizona. Moving on to the Atlanta Falcons, a lot of people are expecting, especially after a hard loss like that in the Super Bowl, for them to have a bit of a slump this year, and that maybe last year was a bit of an outlier. I know they lost their offensive coordinator, but they still have all the same pieces on offense, and they just have a rare ability with how stout their offensive line is and all the weapons that they have to beat teams even when they know what they're doing, but they're so stacked on the outside. You got Terrell Gabriel, Mohamed Sanu, and of course Julio Jones. Expect big things out of Austin Hooper this year, as well as Freeman in the backfield. You know, they can beat teams when they know they're going to run the ball because of their own line, because of their running backs, and they can mix things up in the passing game as well. So I expect big things. I don't expect a slump after that Super Bowl loss. I think they're going to be even hungrier coming into this season. Dan Quinn's entering his third year as their head coach. So the culture's still shifting there. He's still working on that defense. You got Vic Beasley, who just led the league in sacks. Expect, again, big things. You know, it's still the same team, same culture. Another year of cohesion under their belt. They're definitely one of my contenders to go all the way this year, especially after getting that close to the Lombardi Trophy last year. I have them going 13-3, and in a tough division, in a stacked division, definitely contending for that division title and making it deep in the playoffs. Moving on to the Baltimore Ravens, after an 8-8 season, it's clear that they are trending downwards from their Super Bowl team. Ever since Ray Lewis retired, they've sort of been finding their identity from being a tough, grinded-out defensive team. Now they're trying to be an air-it-out team with Joe Flacco. Not a huge believer in Flacco. I know they picked up Macklin in free agency. He's a great player, really underutilized in Kansas City's offense. But at the same time, you know, we're evolving from these one-sided offenses. You know, you got teams like Tampa Bay, Atlanta, and New England that can really keep teams guessing on defense, making game planning that much more difficult. You got a guy like Terrence West in the backfield, could be a breakout player, but really just not sure, hasn't proven himself yet. Could make things pretty one-sided and tough for Baltimore in a division that's sort of up and coming. So I have them at 5-11 this year. On to the Buffalo Bills. Buffalo Bills have a really tough schedule this year, but they've in recent years been a really scrappy team with a solid defensive line that can really control games. LaShawn McCoy is a complete game changer. He's really reestablished himself as an elite back with his time in Buffalo. But right now, Tyrod Taylor, is he a franchise quarterback or not? Not sure. Definitely makes some interesting plays. Can be a smart quarterback from time to time, but does he have the weapons around him this year? Can their shaky secondary make it in that division? Really not sure. Could scrap out some games and finish with a similar record at 7-9 last year, But right now, with the way that their schedule laid out, I've got them at 4-12. And moving on to the Carolina Panthers. Ultimately, this team is make or break based on Cam Newton's health. Quarterback needs his throwing shoulder. He's also a very aggressive player, gets a lot of running plays, puts him, unfortunately, at risk of injury. Will he be able to sustain his high level of play that he had in 2015, his MVP season, this year, all year? That's really what's going to make or break Carolina's season this year. Their defense also hasn't been the same since that 2015 season. Losing a lockdown corner like Josh Norman is definitely going to have a big impact. Luke Kuechly and Davis in the middle, definitely strong leaders. They're getting Julius Peppers back. Could be a difference maker, of course, in the pass rush. They're adding offensive weapons like Christian McCaffrey through the draft. Could be a tough game plan for defensive coordinators. Ultimately, though, is MVP Cam going to show up, or is he more like last year with inaccuracy and poor stats? Ultimately, in their division, I have them a little bit on the rise from their 6-10 year. One more win, 7-9. On to the Windy City. As a Bears fan, I'd love to say that things are looking up in Chicago, but unfortunately, when you move up in the draft and draft a QB with the second pick overall, that's a sort of more of a prospect. You know that the organization's really in a rebuilding phase. Ultimately, when you're in a division that had 3 teams contending for the playoffs and you're in the bottom, it's going to be tough to rebuild from that. Right now, we do have a young, talented offensive line and a breakout star in Jordan Howard. Hopefully they can continue their success. That's definitely going to make whoever's under center that much more comfortable and able to make some plays. Unfortunately, we have an injury to Cameron Meredith, who is emerging as another potential star in the making as potential #1 wide receiver. Right now we have some guys that are really underproven. Kevin White could emerge as a top talent out there, but right now we have Mike Glennon under center throwing to a bunch of 2s and 3s, and it's going to be tough to overcome that. Sort of an underrated defense led by Jarrell Freeman and Quentin Demps, but ultimately it's going to be a tough year. Hopefully Trubisky can emerge as the franchise quarterback that Chicago hopes he can be. Not sure yet, but ultimately a lot of work to do in Chicago. Got them finishing the same as last year at 3-13. On to Cincinnati. They experienced a bit of a drop last season, 6-9-1. Some injuries to their stud receiver AJ Green, making that sort of difficult to overcome. Even though they're losing their star left tackle and Andrew Whitworth, I have them sort of making a bit of a comeback this year. They still have a lot of their pieces in place from their playoff-worthy defenses, Geno Atkins, Carlos Dunlap, making it tough to pass in that division. Andy Dalton, definitely proven that he's a playoff caliber quarterback, and with the addition of Joe Mixon to that run game, could really add some versatility. Very one-sided run games between the 2 running backs that they've had in the past. Giovanni Bernard, probably going to be a passing play or a run to the outside. Jeremy Hill, probably going to be a run up the gut. Look for Joe Mixon to add some versatility and for AJ Green to come back strong and finish as a top 5 elite wide receiver, as he's done so many times in the past. Have them finishing 9-7, flirting with the playoff contention, depending on how things fall in other divisions in the rest of the conference. Moving on to the Cleveland Browns, I'd say it's safe to celebrate a little bit, get excited a little bit in Cleveland, definitely. Anytime you can get out of the draft and get 3, potentially 4 starters right away, things are definitely looking up. You got Deshaun Kaiser, Myles Garrett, and Jabril Peppers all making plays, playing fairly well in the preseason. But ultimately, all those grades and draft numbers, they gotta translate into W's. And sometimes that can take years to build up and transform that talent into a cohesive team that wins. When you got, proven teams in your division, Cincinnati, Baltimore, and of course Pittsburgh, it's going to be tough to see that translate to wins right away. But things are looking up a little bit, and I have them at 4-12, up from their 1-15 season last year. All right, on to the Dallas Cowboys. It's definitely a new era. Got two stud rookies in Dak Prescott and Ezekiel Elliott last year leading the charge, getting them to 13-3. But one and done in the playoffs shows that there's a lot of growth yet to happen, and it's going to be hard to imagine Dak Prescott continuing to take that efficiency that he had last year and seeing that year over year. Eventually teams are going to be a little bit more familiar with this game, and defensive coordinators are going to game plan a little bit better for his style of play. With Ezekiel Elliott's suspension sort of up in the air, it's hard to imagine that that's not going to affect that locker room. So I have them faltering a little bit, 10-6. Definitely still, if you get into double-digit wins, you're in the playoff picture, but I think with the way the NFC is going to play out, I have them just missing the playoffs this year. All right, moving on to the Denver Broncos. The number one defense in the league definitely is going to win you some games, but it's hard to imagine they're going to carry them all the way to the playoffs in that competitive of a division. You do have some weapons on offense in Emmanuel Sanders and Demaryius Thomas, but ultimately Trevor Siemian just isn't going to be that guy to carry a team to the playoffs himself. He's going to need some help in the running backs. Is C.J. Anderson that guy that he was in 2015? He's yet to, he definitely faltered last year, so really kind of uncertain. Bringing guys in like Jamal Charles, Devontae Booker. Is the running back by committee going to help them? We'll see. I have them finishing 6-10, knowing that defense alone could get them a couple more wins. Moving on to the Detroit Lions, the highest paid player in the league, Matt Stafford. Are they going to lean on him more than they did the second half of 2016? They started to take a more conservative approach, and the Green Bay Packers ended up catching him for the division title. Which team are we going to see this year? Are those running backs, Abdullah and Reddick, going to be able to handle that workload, or are they going to have to rely on Stafford with Anquan Bolden no longer in the receiving corps? That defense, you have some questions in the secondary, so it's hard to see in a division with a stout team like Minnesota and a quarterback like Aaron Rodgers getting out of that division on top. I have them finishing 6-10. Moving on to the Green Bay Packers. Anytime, as much as I hate to say it as a Bears fan, anytime you have Aaron Rodgers under center, you always have a chance to win that game. He's just that type of playmaker. Him and Mike McCarthy have a good thing going, a good rapport, and they always sort of find that way to grind back into those games late in the fourth quarter. Coming off of a 10-6 season where they really got hot there at the later half of the season to end up taking that division title. There's a few questions left now for them to answer. Is Ty Montgomery going to be your feature back, or does rookie Jamal Williams have to come in and take on that running back by committee approach? How will your offense respond to the loss of Pro Bowl TJ Lang and JC Tretter? Is Devontae Adams that all-star wide receiver, or is he relying on Rodgers' ability to scramble and make things happen? Really sort of up in the air with that O-line, Rodgers on the ground, anything could happen. Don't want to see your franchise quarterback go down. Could definitely affect their outlook this season. For now, the way it's played out, have them going 11-5, contending for the division, and making the playoffs as well. Moving on to the Texans, as a recent Central Texas transplant, my heart definitely goes out to Houston and all the Gulf from Hurricane Harvey. Definitely some devastating footage coming from that area. Hope that the Houston Texans can provide some well-needed distraction for the city, for the fans. I know definitely someone who's going to want to bring a lot of change and do a lot of good for that area is going to be J.J. Watt, coming off of an injured, missing most of last year. Anytime you bring a 2-3-time Defensive Player of the Year to a already top 5 defense with Clowney and Merciless rushing the passer, good things are going to happen. Is it enough to carry them through a possibly Tom Savage or rookie Deshaun Watson season? I'm not so sure. Big question is Lamar Miller the sort of feature back that you hope he was, or are you going to have to rely on some other running backs to carry the load? Can DeAndre Hopkins continue to climb and compete in that elite top 10 wide receiver category? We'll have to see. Right now, have them finishing at 8-8. Heading into Indianapolis, taking a look at the Colts. Anytime your stud franchise quarterback and Andrew Luck is down, you saw it with Manning, it's trouble. That throwing shoulder, obviously they're going to try to take a long-term approach as he's the face of that franchise for the next 10 plus seasons. I don't see enough talent surrounding him, even when he does come back, if he's at 100% or not. I don't really see the talent surrounding him. I think for Colts fans' sakes, they need to really address the defense and get some playmakers in. Obviously, Frank Gore, sturdy, reliable, dependable back, but he's getting up there in age. They're going to want to look for a new running back in free agency or through the draft next offseason as well. Have them finishing 6-10 outside the playoffs. Over to Jacksonville. There's a lot of buzz going on in Jacksonville, a lot of things to talk about. Big free agent signing in Calais Campbell, addressing some of the offensive line issues, and of course the run game with the number 4 overall pick in Leonard Fournette. But last time I checked, Blake Bortles was still number 1 on the depth chart at quarterback. He hasn't been able to get it done with a pretty talented group of receivers. I don't really see it happening this year either, especially with the way their season lays out in that division. Have them finishing with the same record, 3-13. Heading over to Kansas City and the Chiefs, coming off of their best year since 2003. This is definitely a talented team. All levels of the defense. You got Johnson, middle linebacker, and Eric Berry on the back end. Stud, perennial all-pro safety. Got some fresh legs at running back in Kareem Hunt. Alex Smith is definitely a great game manager, and Tyreek Hill is a game disruptor. Unfortunately, that's sort of where the good news stops for them. Who's receiving the ball outside of Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce with Jeremy Maclin heading over to Baltimore? Can a rookie and Kareem Hunt really carry the load there? Definitely a talented team coming off of a great season, but in a very tough division. I just don't see it being their year in Kansas City. Got them finishing 9-7, depending on how the conference plays out. Could be in the playoffs, but I don't see them going far. Heading over to the West Coast, talking about the LA Rams. Obviously a talented team, a young team, but can they go far with their smash-mouth approach in a division with pretty smash-mouth ready defenses? Obviously Todd Gurley has shown a lot of promise. They added Andrew Whitworth on the outside from the Bengals. That's definitely one of the premier run-blocking offensive linemen in the league. Definitely could turn some things around there. Tavon Austin on the outside is a great playmaker. They have a great front four that can dominate some games, but unfortunately in their division, I see them finishing near the bottom, not really getting as much success as they did last season with Jared Goff. Until he proves that he's a viable starting quarterback in the NFL, I don't see them going far. I have them finishing 2-14 this year. Staying in LA, coming up from SoCal, from San Diego to Los Angeles, is the Chargers. In their first year in LA, I'm pretty excited about it. You have a pretty stacked defensive front. They have that rare ability to rush only 4 defenders to the passer and still put pressure on. That allows guys like Casey Hayward, who led the NFL in interceptions last year, to do more of the same. Expect big things on both sides of the ball. Even though they're missing their top pick, Mike Williams at pick number 7, Phillip Rivers is still getting a huge piece on the outside, and Keenan Allen. He's had some injury issues, but when he's played big. Expect big things. If Melvin Gordon can repeat even some of his success from last year, rely on guys like Hunter Henry and future Hall of Famer Antonio Gates to sort of secure the middle, continue moving those chains. Really like this balanced team in a very tough division to come out fairly unscathed at 13-3, make some noise in the playoffs. All right, heading down to Miami. Again, after some of the devastation in Houston and New Orleans, definitely my thoughts are with Miami, Tampa Bay, potentially Jacksonville, and the rest of the East Coast as Irma heads their way. Can only imagine how that can affect these players. Is football certainly can't be the first thing on their minds as their friends and family prepare for what is again another potentially historic hurricane hitting the East Coast. That being said, they now have a first week bye. Both Miami and Tampa Bay, who are slated to play week 1, had bye on week 11. What that means is that both teams are going to have to play all 16 games consecutively without a bye in between. Again, not what's on their minds, I'm sure, but that grinding season will likely impact both teams as they head into this year. Obviously, injury to your franchise quarterback Ryan Tannehill leaves room for Jay Cutler to come in with a familiar quarterback coach, potentially giving you a little bit more versatility. I know he's got a strong arm. Again, as a Bears fan, would caution you to be too optimistic. If he can wrangle in his gunslinger ways, he certainly has some threats in Landry and Parker on the outside. Jay Ajayi emerged as an elite back. Can he repeat his success of last year and show that he can make it through all 16 games as a feature back? That defense led by Ndamukong Suh certainly going to set the tone this year, but again, a lot of things going on, a lot of factors to consider heading into the season for Miami. Have them finishing 6-10. All right, heading up north to Minnesota. Pretty excited about this Minnesota Vikings team, even though they're in my Bears division. Have to say that they resemble this Kansas City team, but a little bit younger and a little bit more talented. Love the pickup of Dalvin Cook. I think that's going to be huge in their moving on and filling of the gap that Adrian Peterson left in his injury years, and then now, of course, heading down to New Orleans. You have your deep threat in Stephon Diggs, very closely resembles Tyreek Hill. You have your younger, possibly more talented game manager in Sam Bradford, who had a lot of success in his first year in Minnesota. Expect to see that pick up this year. Great offensive line. and a very aggressive, talented, quick defense. Look for them to make a lot of noise in what could be a more shaky NFC North than last year. Look for them to lead the way at 12-4 and potentially make some noise. Again, very talented team. If it's true that defenses do win championships, this is definitely a defense to watch. Heading over to New England and the defending Super Bowl champs. Look for them to, in a pretty easy division, make it to the playoffs again this year. But there are some questions. It's not going to be an easy trip back to the Super Bowl. Gronk's back. You got Brandon Cooks from New Orleans, looking like you could be even a better team than last year. However, you lose LeGarrette Blount off the great season that he had and replace him with Mike Gillislee, a bit more of a question mark. Can he be that feature back for New England? Tom Brady, now 40. Can he be the same player? Will he have the same chemistry without Julian Edelman on the field? Can Danny Amendola and some of these other New England players come in and provide the same impact, or is it going to be a bit of a rougher trip back to the Super Bowl for New England? Look for them to go 13-3 and be a contender for that 6th ring for Brady and Belichick. Heading down to New Orleans, love Breeze, love that team. He's been carrying Nola on his right arm for years now. Definitely going to go down as one of the best. In my opinion, could be the best quarterback, at least statistically, in the NFL. That being said, it's tough for me to say this, but I have them going 5-11 when your greatest addition is a 32-year-old running back. Granted, he's shown signs that he can come back from an injury strong and definitely could be an interesting thing to watch down in New Orleans with, of course, Breeze there to supplement, keep the box light for Adrian Peterson to find some holes. Definitely got a good pass rush on the defense, but can they sustain their success, Breeze's success, when you have other quarterbacks arising in that league in Matt Ryan, Cam Newton, and of course Jameis Winston, who's really shown signs that he could be an elite QB in the NFL. Look for New Orleans to experience a bit of a drop back here, 5-11. Heading over to the East Coast, the New York Giants. Hard and a tough division to see. Eli, who's never really been that elite of a quarterback, has definitely had some success, Super Bowl rings, but leaning a lot on his defenses in the past. Can that defense carry this team with Eli getting up there in age? Running game's a big question mark. The offensive line's a big question mark. So is that going to impede Eli from being able to take advantage of his new weapons in Marshall and Ingram? And of course OBJ on the outside, is he going to be able to be healthy after that questionable hit in the preseason? Look for, in a tight division, New York to finish 6-10. Moving on to the New York Jets. There's no easy way to say this, so I'm going to ease in with some of the positives. This defense is looking up. Muhammad Wilkerson is a beast up front. You've got Jamal Adams, who's a stud at safety and is a natural leader, going to lead this defense for years to come. Baleel Powell's emerging, with a similar sort of gameplay as his teammate Matt Forte. You have Anunwa, who sort of came out last year as a potential legitimate #1 wide receiver, still sort of in the air. With him out, I see the Jets being very one-sided this year on offense. I'm not sure McCown's really the answer with limited receiving options. So again, no easy way to say this, but I see them going 0-16. Moving to Oakland and potentially Las Vegas, we have the Raiders. Definitely one of the more talented teams in the league. adding weapons like Cordero Patterson and Jared Cook to an already stacked passing game to go with that dominant offensive line. Then you take Beast Mode out of retirement, take him to his hometown of Oakland, and you're slated to have one of the best offenses in the league with Derek Carr under center. Ready to take on some of those defenses in the AFC West. Speaking of defense, you may have heard of this guy Khalil Mack. He's a complete beast, and he's going to go complete predator and put these games out of reach once his offense gives him the lead. Have them as one of my favorites to lead the AFC at 14-2, and right now as my favorites for taking home the hardware overall in February. Moving over to Philadelphia and the Eagles. Is LeGarrette Blount too fat to take on that number one back load? Is Carson Wentz going to have a sophomore slump? I'm not really having any of that. Honestly, I see this team as a contender for the Super Bowl this year. May shock some, but when you have the league's leading rusher in terms of touchdowns, adding to the team with the best offensive line, then you add someone like Alshon Jeffries and Torrey Smith to take the tops off defenses. You got Darren Sproles as a sort of change of pace back, and Zach Ertz also in the middle. I see this team with an offense that can really carry a team to the playoffs, but it doesn't have to. You got guys like Brandon Graham and Fletcher Cox up front, as well as Timmy Jernigan. Then you add a guy like Barnett through the draft, who was breaking Reggie White's sack records at Tennessee in college. It's just the perfect melting pot for an offense and defense to come together. I'm not letting them surprise me, but I think they are going to surprise some teams, especially in that division. Have them taking the NFC East at 12-4 this year, making a deep playoff push. With 16 games of Big Ben, Antonio Brown, and Le'Veon Bell, Pittsburgh is slated to have a lot of success this year in an otherwise pretty unstable division. You have weapons like that, and you get help from a pretty easy schedule. I have Pittsburgh taking their division pretty handedly, finishing 13-3, and having a chance to add to their already league-leading 6 Super Bowl championships this year. Heading over to the Bay Area in San Francisco, definitely a lot of moves in the offseason, adding key players like Brian Hoyer and Pierre Garçon to help out Carlos Hyde with that offense, make that a little less one-sided. You got weapons like Reuben Foster to help Navarro Bowman with that linebacking core. Unfortunately, outside those two linebackers, the defense is a little bit questionable. Can Brian Hoyer take some of his limited success as a backup, filling in for injured quarterbacks? Can he maintain that success that he's shown throughout a full season? Can Pierre Garçon continue to be a reliable receiver with Hoyer as his quarterback? These are some of the questions that San Francisco's got to answer. In the meantime, I still see this as another rebuilding year. They have a lot of weapons they still need to add to compete in that division. Got them finishing 1-15 this year. Before I move on to Seattle, I first want to say that my thoughts are really with Michael Bennett and sort of the injustice that he faced in Las Vegas. No person, innocent, guilty, white, black, brown, purple, anything in between, deserves to fear for their life in that way, especially someone who is innocent and singled out solely for the color of their skin, as Michael Bennett was. To me, that really speaks to why it's so important for players like Michael Bennett and others throughout the league to stand, sit, kneel. During the national anthem happens to be a moment for them to use their platform as a professional athlete in a particular part of the filming of an NFL game to make a statement outside of gameplay. To me, these statements are solely to promote and uplift these communities, in terms of America and our soldiers and our veterans and our police force. I don't believe these are anti-statements towards you. All of these players, I feel, respect and appreciate everything you do for our country, and solely just want to represent their communities in a way that they feel that they need to in these times that we're facing. On to the Seahawks and their season to come. Obviously a very talented team, and on both sides of the ball, when you have guys like Bennett, Cliff Averill, and now Richardson up front, guys like KJ Wright and Bobby Wagner in the middle, and the Legion of Boom behind them, they're always a contender to lead the league in terms of defensive yards allowed and points allowed. They have a sort of up-and-coming passing game with Russell Wilson continuing to grow and become more familiar as really starting to be in the contention of the elite top 5 quarterbacks in the league, as well as his passing game really becoming healthier and being able to be a threat on his feet as well. The big question on offense is, can either Eddie Lacy, Thomas Rawls, or CJ Prosise emerge and take that top running back spot? I know you got some questions on the offensive line, but that's going to be their big question mark in terms of their success this year. If so, if one of those guys can come up and be a 1,000-yard rusher this year, my prediction of 11-5 could be a game or two lower than what this team is capable of. Moving over to Tampa Bay, they were finishing as one of the hottest teams in the NFL last year, and I really see that continuing. They're a pretty young team, so I have my doubts that they can really take it all the way, but they have the right pieces, and it all starts with the quarterback. Jameis Winston is on a record-setting pace, and he's entering his 3rd year, and he's only 23. So he's got tons of talent. Surpassing 4,000 yards each of his last 2 seasons with virtually only Mike Evans to throw to. Then you add Deshaun Jackson, who was a 1,000-yard receiver last year with Washington, and O.J. Howard, who's a stud at tight end through the draft. You add guys like Doug Martin, if he can return to his old form. I know he's got some suspensions to serve, but you got Jacquizz Rodgers to take his place if he does continue to miss games. You have another great starting running back option, and this offense seems pretty unstoppable. Then you add back that with a defense led by perennial Pro Bowler Gerald McCoy. The guy has a lot of fun out there, but he also gets the job done. He eats up 2 to 3 blockers on every play and still somehow flirts with double-digit sacks each year. That also leads for other players to get to the quarterback and really disrupt other teams. I'm looking for Tampa Bay to really sort of emerge as sort of Carolina did a couple years ago when they made their Super Bowl run. Got them leapfrogging Atlanta for the division and leading the NFC at 14-2. Heading over to Tennessee, in sort of a smaller market area and a weak division, I think Tennessee is really emerging as sort of a sleeper in the AFC, and I could see them with their young leader in Marcus Mariota becoming a juggernaut in the AFC for years to come. They're sort of reinventing the way that offense can be played with their run-heavy offense, whether it's Henry, Murray, or Marcus Mariota. Defenses are having a lot of difficulty stopping what they know is coming because of that offensive line and the talent that they have in the backfield. Look for them to sort of pave the way in terms of rushing yards this year. In terms of defense, they're a brick wall up front, and they have a lot of great supporting players on the back end of the defense as well. I'm looking for them to easily take the division at 12-4. Heading over to DC and the Redskins, this is going to be tough because I really am a believer in the Wizard and Cousins, and I really think Terrell Pryor was an amazing pickup. I think he's going to play his way into the top 5 wide receiver contention with Evans, AJ Green, Odell Beckham, Julio, and Antonio Brown. That being said, Cousins is going to have to adjust to a new passing game with not only a new offensive coordinator, but he's missing Pierre Garçon and Deshaun Jackson, both 1,000-yard receivers from last year. So look for them to have a bit of a shaky start. Maybe if they find that running game with Robert Kelly, running behind Trent Williams and that stout offensive line. They've also got a pretty strong defense back there, led by Kerrigan and other strong players. They're in a tough division, so have them finishing 7-9. But if they can get some continuity going, get their new offensive coordinator, get a belief in the system, I see 1 to 2 years from now this Washington Redskins team making a deep playoff push. Okay, so that wraps up the 2017-18 regular season. If you're following along, heading into the playoffs, we have on the AFC, we've got Oakland as the top seed, 14-2. New England, number 2, 13-3. Pittsburgh winning their division, 3rd seed at 13-3 as well. And wrapping things up, division leaders, Tennessee at 12-4. For the wild cards, we got the Los Angeles Chargers at 13-3, and Cincinnati could be close, depending between Cincinnati and Kansas City, I believe, both finishing 9-7. Cincinnati just edging Kansas City out. On the NFC side, we got Tampa Bay, number 1 seed, 14-2. Philadelphia, number 2, 12-4. Minnesota, also 12-4. And Seattle winning their division at 11-5. Wild card teams for the NFC, I've got Atlanta at 13-3 and Green Bay at 11-5. How that breaks down, Tampa Bay and Philadelphia getting the byes in week 1, Oakland, New England on the AFC side getting byes. Wild card matchup in the AFC, we've got Tennessee against Los Angeles Chargers. Tennessee a bit younger. Also Chargers actually having the better record, even though they will be playing on the road that week. I have the Chargers beating Tennessee for the AFC wild card matchup. Pittsburgh and Cincinnati got a divisional matchup there. Pittsburgh, the superior team, they're going to walk away with it on that end. Heading into the NFC wildcard games, we have Atlanta at Seattle. Tough to play in Seattle, but Atlanta has the experience. They're hungry. They want to get back to that Super Bowl game. I have Atlanta beating Seattle from the wildcard game. Minnesota at Green Bay, another divisional matchup. Again, Green Bay at Minnesota, but I think Rodgers finds a way to get it done. I got Green Bay edging out Minnesota. Next, that leads Tampa Bay versus Atlanta. Tampa Bay getting the home field advantage. Maybe coming off of a bye, might not be as fresh and game ready as Atlanta. Again, the experienced Atlanta versus the inexperienced Tampa Bay team. I have Atlanta edging out Tampa Bay in that divisional matchup heading into the NFC Championship game. Green Bay and Philly. Philly, home field advantage, tough defense. I really believe this is an emerging team under Carson Wentz. They say he's looking like a new man out there in Philly. I think he has enough to get the job done against Green Bay heading into the NFC Championship game. Out in the AFC, we have Oakland against the Chargers, another divisional matchup. I think Oakland just has too much talent for the Chargers to handle. Could be one of the last pushes for Phillip Rivers in that era, but Derek Carr, just too much talent for the Chargers to handle, edging out the Chargers in that matchup heading into the AFC Championship game. Pittsburgh and New England, another playoff rematch this year. I think New England finds a way to get it done again heading into the AFC Championship there. AFC Championship game then comes down to Oakland and New England. Does New England have the running game? Do they, are they the same team without Edelman? I'm not sure. This talented Oakland team, I think, takes it and beats New England heading into the Super Bowl. On the NFC side of things, we have Atlanta and Philly. Again, another emerging team in Atlanta, or another emerging team in Philadelphia very balanced team. I think that pass rush is just too much with Barnett and some of those other players on that defensive line. I think Philadelphia upsets Atlanta in that game and heads to their first Super Bowl since the McNabb era. In the Super Bowl, we have Oakland, Philadelphia, two young quarterbacks. Very interesting matchup there. Maybe a bit of a surprise for some, but I think it would be a great game, great entertaining game. I think you get Oakland with some of their top-tier talent players taking it all. I think you're going to see the Lombardi Trophy in Oakland. All right, that's it. There's the recap of the 2017-2018 season. Let me know how I did. Let me know if your team's going to do, of course, better than maybe I predicted. Drop some comments in. Follow along on Twitter. Hit subscribe if you want to follow along with these predictions as I give weekly updates on previous week games, and then also provide what to watch for in the coming weeks for key player matchups, key games to watch, things you definitely don't want to miss. Follow along definitely to see how these predictions go. Will Oakland end up taking it all? Is Philly going to be a surprise? Definitely some big questions heading into a new NFL season. Thanks for watching, everyone.